In the fourth table law of the 12 table laws, the arguably most important body of law in the old Roman Republic, it was stated that horribly deformed children must be put to death. State-mandated infanticide, state-mandated killing of infants born with deformities through no choice of their own. Yeah, this episode is going to be dark, but I think it's important that we give context for this law and the practice of infanticide in the Roman world. And let us begin with the context for the 12 table laws. The 12 table laws were created during the 5th century BC, several hundreds of years before the time of Caesar and the fall of the Republic. So this is extremely old law, even in regards to Roman time itself, and was made far before Rome became a great power. At this stage, Rome was just a small city-state, among several others on the Italic peninsula. And it should be known that surrounding peoples around the city of Rome also did these things to various degrees, such as the Etruscans, the Samnites, and, for example, the Greeks. The killing of newborns through exposure was widely practiced in ancient Greece, though only Sparta seems to have mandated killing of deformed infant children by law. Yet, general infanticide by choice was widespread in Greece, and considering that the Greeks had colonies all over the Italian peninsula, Greek influence upon Roman culture was noticeable even from early Roman times, as there existed a lot of Greek city-states on the Italic peninsula, and Rome generally adopted a lot of Greek culture. When it came to the method of killing, exposure was the preferred method of disposal of the child, as the act in itself was not considered to be murder by the Greeks. Moreover, the exposed child technically still had a chance of being rescued by the gods or any passerbys. This very situation of leaving the child to be exposed to the elements in the wild was a recurring motif in Greek mythology, where the child often would be saved either by gods or by passerbys and then grew up to be a hero. Babies could be rejected due to various reasons. Babies would often be rejected, for example, if they were considered illegitimate, unhealthy or deformed, having the wrong sex, or being too great of a burden upon the family that could not afford the child. Outside of just the law about killing deformed infants, the practice was also very prevalent in ancient Rome as well, where the father, at least in the early Roman Republic, had the right to kill any children of any age, not just deformed ones or infants that were born to the family. And speaking about infanticide, according to Roman mythology, Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome and twin infant sons of the war god Mars, survived near infanticide after being tossed into the Tiber River by being rescued by a she-wolf. Again, it should be pointed out that infanticide was not uncommon in the ancient world. But what makes Rome stand out from most other cultures is that it mandated it regarding deformed babies by law and not by choice or just social pressure. It should also be pointed out that the reasons for this mandate were not a religious thing, as child sacrifice and infanticide due to religious obligations would be seen as sacrilegious and strongly against the mos maiorum, the mores and traditions of Roman society. For example, Roman sources condemned other cultures, such as the Carthaginians, for doing child sacrifice in connection to their cult activities. But talking about religion, it is important to know that pre-Christian Roman society was, as the term implies, not Christian, and had thus entirely different views upon the world and moral values associated with the world. The Romans had a view of might was right in many regards. Even the Republic was argued in these terms. The might of the people stood above the singular person, the king, as the might of the many stands above the might of the few. And slavery was common, as Rome throughout its history was practicing it. The Romans were even putting people into bloody gladiator games, where people fought to the death at times for the amusement of other people. You also had the Roman legions, killing a tenth, doing a decimation of their own forces for cowardness or weakness. And you have various types of torturous types of executions, such as crucifixion, being ever present in Roman legal codes. And as mentioned before, the Roman father, usually the supreme authority in Roman society, had the patria potestas, the fatherly power to decide life and death in the family for whatever infraction he deemed it necessary to judge in by giving the death penalty to family members. This was a society that was not putting very high value on human life and suffering of the individual in comparison to the collective strength of the society. And actually, when you consider the law that mandates the killing of children, you should also consider the fact that the mandate is actually in a certain way against the will of the father of the child that is to be put to death, as the law takes away the choice, the usual patria potestas, the fatherly power of the father. Roman culture usually valued the fatherhead's independence in matters related to family, with great independence and great personal individual power of the father to decide in matters of family. So this law is actually kind of severe and important, as it is a departure from the general norm by dictating directly in the family matters of Roman families. Yet it was deemed that this was a necessary measure by the old Republican Romans, and thus we need to consider the context of when this law was created. And the fact of the matter is that the law was created in a context where child mortality and death generally was very high, with war and unstableness being ever present, especially in the early Republic of the 5th century, when Rome was only a small city-state with some small surrounding territories, surrounded by enemies and other city-states. Rome was a weak entity exposed to danger and in almost constant battle and conflict with its neighbors, many of whom were equally strong or even stronger than Rome. A far cry from the strong, mighty empire that Rome would become in the future. In this case, it was probably felt by the ancient Romans that it was important that only the strong survive, as the weak in Roman society would take important resources that could go to healthy children, that could defend Rome, and that would contribute to Roman society, and not make Roman society weak. Weakness would mean that Roman society would be preyed upon by its enemies, and this seems thus through the law to have been a case of society standing above individual choice, the collective being preferred over individual choice and life, as people probably prioritized the importance of not raising children that would be a burden to Roman society by raising individuals that would not perform to 100% in society, as deformities were identified as a sign of weakness. If a child was born with deformities, it was probably seen as being better that it was put to death, so that a new child could be birthed and given the same resources that would have otherwise have been given to the killed child. Additionally, it is also possible that social support systems existed in ancient Roman times, as they did in the later Roman Republic. This would have also made deformed babies with illnesses into an additional public burden and not just a private burden upon the family, and thus there could exist financial incentives for the central Roman state to have actually imposed restrictions upon which sort of children could live. Whatever the case may be, possibly various extreme conditions during the 5th century forced Roman society to adapt this sort of extreme law that mandated the killing of children. We can see this probability of this law being the result of very extreme conditions during the 5th century, in that the law seemed to have lessened in severity at the end of the Roman Republic, when the Roman state was much stronger, with less outer enemies that could threaten it, and generally richer than it was before. In later times of the Roman Republic, we see that infanticide generally was still practiced by individual choice, but the obligation from the law of the fourth table law seemed to no longer be there, as there are examples of various Roman families keeping their children despite clear disfigurements. And the punishments also went from the pain of death to monetary punishment to no apparent punishment at all for keeping disfigured children. So the law of state mandated infanticide quietly disappeared out of practice, though it still seems to have remained as a law, even if not used, during the time of the Roman Principate Empire. Yet, general infanticide by choice was legally sanctioned as punishable only in the 4th century, probably due to the spread of Christianity forbidding the practice, and with the legislation of Emperor Constantine, which provided that the parents who killed their child be tortured and then drowned, before only imposed upon those guilty for the murder of close relatives that were not direct descendants. A clear punishment for the killing of infants was provided in Roman legislation, going a full 180 from the original legislation that demanded the death of deformed infants, finally superseding the 4th table law through a process of several centuries of cultural change within Roman society. This has been a rather heavy subject to discuss. My viewers, if you have any questions or other comments, please post them in the comment section and I will try to respond as quickly as possible. Also like this video like you would like Constantine's ban on infanticide. Please do subscribe as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.